I was born in 1934, in a Germany that was already beginning to change in ways that, at the time, I could not yet comprehend. My family seemed normal, loving, with ordinary routines. My father was dedicated, my mother attentive, and I, just a curious child, felt safe in our small world. But the security I knew began to dissipate little by little, as the winds of Nazism blew stronger, and the rumors about the persecution of Jews became reality. I was 4 years old when the threat began to take concrete forms. And even so young, I felt that something very wrong was happening around me. I remember subtle changes in daily life, neighbors who avoided talking to us, people who looked at us strangely when we passed on the street. School started to feel different. Suddenly, some children disappeared, some families no longer mingled, and my mother began to talk about precautions that I didn't fully understand, but that I had to obey without questioning. My world, which had once seemed safe and predictable, began to become confusing and threatening. I remember the feeling of fear, but also the innocence, the simple fact of being a child, trying to understand the inexplicable. My family decided, as a precaution, to move to the Netherlands, in the hope of finding a safer place. But the war spread quickly, and even the move did not protect us completely. Shortly after we arrived, the Nazis invaded the country. Suddenly, we were living in a world where the color of our skin, the name of our religion, and our heritage became reasons for hatred. I was still just a child, but the gravity of the situation began to seep into my days, into my routines. My everyday life was abruptly interrupted. The family, which had once been the source of comfort and protection, now had to face impossible decisions, trying to preserve the safety of a young child amid the chaos. People began to disappear: friends, neighbors, acquaintances, and every piece of news about deportations or arrests added a layer of fear that I, even so young, could perceive. My mother, always protective, had to teach me to stay quiet, to hide, not to ask too many questions. I absorbed these instructions with the seriousness that only a child who feels fear can have, trying to understand that the world, which had once seemed simple, was now full of invisible dangers. It was the early years of my life that defined, in an intense way, the perception of vulnerability and the need for resilience. There were moments when hunger was almost constant, the cold was piercing, and the insecurity seemed endless. Every small task became a silent battle: getting food, keeping the shelter safe, avoiding any suspicious glance that could reveal our identity. Despite my age, I learned to read signs, to notice subtle changes in the environment, to understand that every human gesture could have profound consequences. And then came the camps. For me, at 4 years old, the world became much smaller, crueler, and more terrifying. I remember the fences, the uniforms, the shouting orders, and the constant fear that hung in the air. Everything seemed confusing and threatening. But even in this scene of extreme suffering, there were small moments of humanity that stood out. A hand holding mine, a secret smile, a protective gesture. They were small flames of hope amid an overwhelming darkness. I learned early that surviving depended not only on luck, but on attention to details, the ability to listen and obey, and a silent faith that there would still be better days. In the first months in the camps, my world seemed completely defined by fear. I was 4 years old, but I understood that every step could be the difference between life and death. I began to perceive loss, the absence of friends and neighbors, the separation of family members. The childhood innocence, which had once seemed infinite, was interrupted by images and experiences that no one should witness so early. Every day was a silent battle, and every small victory, finding some food, receiving a gesture of care, was celebrated with a mixture of gratitude and relief. Even with all the sadness, there was within me a strength that I could not yet name, a need to keep going, not to give in to absolute fear, to respond to violence with adaptation and constant attention. My mother became my anchor. Her love and guidance were vital. She taught me small survival strategies that I followed with adult discipline. Even though I was just a child, I learned to control my reactions, to remain calm even when the situation was desperate, to listen to the world around me, to anticipate dangers. And so, my story of survival began. The childhood I knew had been torn away, replaced by a daily life of fear, hunger, and uncertainty. But despite the brutality that surrounded us, I learned lessons that would shape my entire life: resilience, observation, prudence, and above all, the importance of valuing every small gesture of humanity amid destruction. These early years, though marked by horror, were the ones that planted the seed of the strength that would later allow me to rebuild my life, share my story, and educate others about the horrors we faced so that they may never be forgotten. Looking back, I can still feel the weight of those days in the camps. I was only 5 or 6, but I quickly realized the adult world around me was filled with merciless rules and impossible choices. Waking up meant facing cruel routines, lines for inspection, the constant fear of being selected. Survival depended on discipline, attention, and pure luck. Hunger was a constant presence. I remember sharing crumbs with my family, the empty plate beside me, a symbol of both fear and solidarity. Even the children learned to move silently, to not draw attention. Every detail could mean life or death. I saw families separated, heard screams, and watched people disappear. It was a place designed to steal not just life, but hope and dignity. But even there, small acts of care were precious. A hand holding mine, a protective look, these moments taught me to value humanity. They became the small anchors that kept us sane. When the war finally ended, the sense of relief was accompanied by a painful reality. The world I knew had been completely destroyed. The long-awaited freedom came with the awareness of irreparable losses. Friends, family, neighbors, the entire life I had known had been erased. I was about 10 years old when I could finally feel a bit of relief. But the trauma of the years of horror did not vanish. Every memory remained vivid in my mind. Every detail of the painful experiences in the camps etched as if I had to remember everything forever. Rebuilding life began slowly. We were just a few survivors, trying to find meaning in continuing. The childhood that had been stolen from me needed to be reconstructed in an environment that was not yet fully safe or welcoming. I had to learn to trust again, to live without constant fear, and to regain a sense of normalcy that had disappeared so long ago. Learning to walk the streets without constantly looking over my shoulder, to eat without fear, to speak without hesitation, every simple action became a challenge and an essential step toward emotional and physical reconstruction. School, which had once seemed a distant place, now became an opportunity to rebuild my world. Learning became a way to reaffirm life, to feel that there was still a future. Lessons in history, mathematics, and language were infused with experiences no one could teach in a classroom, but which profoundly shaped my understanding of the world. I was still a child, but the maturity that suffering had forced upon me was present in every decision, every observation, every interaction. Life was starting over, but with the weight of memories I knew I would carry forever. During this period, my family became my greatest source of strength. My father, my mother, and my siblings shared the same trauma, but also offered constant support. Together, we learned to rebuild, to create a routine that included small joys, moments of hope, and celebrations of survival. Every gesture of care, every conversation, every plan for the future was a way to reclaim life and resist the years of pain we had endured. I learned that survival did not end with liberation. It continued every day, in the way we chose to live and keep our dignity intact. The memory of the camps, though painful, also transformed into a moral commitment. I realized early on that my experiences could not be forgotten. The remembrance of what happened, the testimony of suffering and loss, became something I needed to share with others. The responsibility to educate, to warn future generations about the horrors of the Holocaust, became a personal mission. I learned that physical survival was only part of the story. The survival of memory and the transmission of truth were just as vital. Over the years, I began participating in events, lectures, and interviews, sharing my story with students, communities, and organizations dedicated to Holocaust remembrance. Each account was an effort to turn pain into learning, fear into awareness, and loss into teaching. Telling my experience was difficult, as every detail brought back intense memories, but it was necessary. I knew that by sharing, I could help others understand the magnitude of human suffering and the importance of fighting intolerance and violence. My stolen childhood, though marked by suffering, also taught me profound lessons about resilience, empathy, and courage. I learned to value every act of kindness, to recognize the strength that can emerge even in the darkest moments, and to understand that survival is not just physical, but also emotional and moral. Every small victory in the camp, surviving, holding on to hope, protecting someone, was training that shaped my entire life. The ability to resist and rebuild became central to who I became. The reconstruction process also included adapting to new cultures and environments. We moved to other countries, starting practically from scratch, with little more than our memories and the determination to live, learning new languages, making new friends, and integrating into communities we did not know was a constant challenge. Every step required courage, patience, and a silent faith that we could rebuild a dignified life. This adaptation was a slow process, but essential for healing the wounds left by years of persecution and violence. Over time, I realized that my experience could be used as a tool for teaching and awareness. I developed methods to speak about the Holocaust in a way that young people and adults could understand, not just as a series of historical facts, but as real human experiences full of fear, courage, and resistance. Teaching about history became a way to honor those who did not survive and to ensure that the lessons learned were not forgotten. Education became my mission, and every lecture or meeting was a reminder of the power of memory to prevent future horrors. Today, looking back, I see that my life is marked by both suffering and resistance. Every step I took after the war was shaped by the experiences I lived through. I learned that survival requires not only physical strength, but also emotional resilience and moral commitment. Every story I share is a way to keep alive the memory of those who perished, to teach about the dangers of hatred and intolerance, and to inspire future generations to value life, justice, and compassion. My journey did not end in the concentration camps. It continued every day, in rebuilding a life, in education, in sharing memory, and in the fight to turn pain into learning. I am a witness to what happened, a survivor and an educator. And every step I have taken since has been guided by the need to ensure that the stories of the children who suffered and resisted in the Holocaust are never forgotten. And that is how I transform my lost childhood into a message of hope, resilience, and awareness for the entire world.